Hey, ugly. Your kid's a defect, just like you. Said my ex-husband, Sean, as we ran into each other for the first time in 13 years. He looked at me and my daughter, who was in a wheelchair, and threw those words at us. I was about to retort with some harsh words when from behind me, "What seems to be the problem with my daughter?" It was Kyle, my current husband. His voice carried well, causing not just me, but also the bystanders to turn around. Looking back at Sean, his face had turned pale. "My name is Emily, a 35-year-old housewife. I live with my 3-year-old daughter Mia and my husband Kyle. The house we live in was originally built by my grandfather-in-law. When Kyle and I got married, my parents-in-law, worried about our living expenses, transferred it to us so we wouldn't have to pay rent. I was grateful for my kind parents-in-law's gesture that I actively helped with taking care of my grandfather-in-law until I got pregnant with Mia. After Mia was born, I reduced the frequency of my visits, but Kyle and I still made it a point to visit at least once every 2 weeks. We would help out or take care of grandfather-in-law to give my parents-in-law a break. They always expressed their gratitude, saying, "We really appreciate all your help, especially when you're so busy with the child." Yeah, Kyle married a wonderful person. But no matter how much I do, it feels like it's never enough to repay them. After all, I owe my life to Kyle's sister Chelsea and the rest of the in-laws, not once, but twice. Kyle is my first marriage, but I've had one failed marriage before. I met my first husband, Sean Smith, when I moved into an apartment after getting accepted into college. We happened to move in on the same day, and as we unpacked, we shared tips about the nearby supermarket and cheap, tasty restaurants, quickly becoming friends. Sean was tall and handsome. Most students at my college are locals. It's kind of awkward for those of us from other areas. But you and I are in the same boat, Emily. It's easier since we don't have to be on guard, right? He would say, and gradually he started to stay over at my place, leading to a living situation that was almost like cohabitating. At that time, I couldn't believe I was dating Sean, and I thought it was enough to be a reassuring presence for him. So I ended up doing all the housework like a housekeeper. But as they say, love is blind. I turned a blind eye to Sean's selfishness, and when he said, "Part-time work is tough, and I want to quit, but I can't because the money from my parents isn't enough. Plus classes are getting busier," I suggested, "Why don't we rent a slightly bigger place? Don't worry about the rent," and offered to move to a new apartment and pay the rent myself. Sean agreed immediately, but for some reason, he insisted on getting a landline, ignoring my opinion that a mobile phone was enough. When I questioned it, he explained, "My parents live in Germany for work. They're old-fashioned, and if they found out we were living together before marriage, not only would they stop sending money, they might even tell me to drop out. You wouldn't like that, would you, Emily? And your parents would be sad to find out we're living together, even though we plan to marry eventually." At that time, I was so thrilled by Sean's mention of eventually marrying that I didn't give much thought to anything else. However, living together turned out to be a significant financial burden for me. Since the apartment contract was in my name, I inevitably had to pay not only the rent, but also the utility bills, and even the landline and communication fees. At first, Sean said, "Since you're paying the rent, I'll pay more towards the utilities." But soon enough, he started saying, "Sorry, Emily, I'm short on money again this month. I can't say no when friends ask me out." And I ended up covering all the expenses. Before I knew it, I was also paying for groceries and the beer Sean drank every night. The only expense Sean seemed to cover was when he ordered pizza for his friends when they came over. And every time he invited friends over, he would say, "I haven't told my friends about us living together because it would be awkward if they teased us about it." So he would ask me to leave the apartment. But outside of university classes, all my time was spent on part-time work and housework, leaving me with no friends and no choice but to spend time alone, sitting on a swing in the park, waiting for the time I could go home. Because I was short on money, I eventually broke down, thinking, what am I even doing? And I couldn't stop my tears. During this time, I began to seriously focus on job hunting. Eventually, I got fed up with Sean and told him, "You need to start contributing to the living expenses. You're relying on me too much." Suddenly, he responded in a sweet tone, "Sorry, I just got too comfortable with you, Emily. Please don't be so mad." He was clearly trying to appease me. Sean suddenly presented me with a ring from a popular casual brand at the time, saying, "I can't afford anything better right now, but someday I'll buy you a diamond ring." When he put that ring on my finger, "This is the happiest I've ever been." I remembered blurting out a phrase I must have heard somewhere, but that was the only happy memory I had. Soon after, Sean said, "I'm torn between getting a job and studying abroad. If things stay the same, I'll just end up relying on you again. It's a crucial point in my life, so I want to try being on my own for a while." And then he left. Being suddenly alone made me anxious, but since he left some of his belongings and we still texted and called every day, I thought, I shouldn't get depressed. I need to focus on my own job hunting. And I managed to receive an offer from a company. But around that time, strange calls began coming in on the landline. Listening to the answering machine, messages like, "You need to repay us by this week," and "Don't take us for fools," shocked me. I hurriedly contacted Sean, but he just said, "It's nothing, don't worry about it." Eventually, demand letters and final notices started arriving. When I finally confronted him, he exploded. "You're so annoying. I've been putting up with an ugly defect like you for so long, so you can repay it as a thank you." Then, he stopped taking my calls. I was dumbfounded when I realized I didn't know Sean's new address. Even the university refused to disclose it to someone unrelated. Desperate for any clue, I opened the belongings Sean had left behind, only to find documents of debt from various consumer finance companies, old clothes, and a worn-out laptop. There was nothing that could lead me to Sean's parents' address in Germany, or his current whereabouts. I realized then that I was nothing more than a source of money for Sean. But worse was yet to come. Shortly after losing contact with Sean, representatives from the consumer finance companies showed up at my apartment, informing me that I was Sean's wife and therefore a guarantor for his debts, demanding immediate repayment. It was Kyle and his family who saved me from this situation. That's why I want to do anything I can for Kyle and my in-laws. One day, while walking through the mall with Mia in her wheelchair, I unexpectedly ran into the person who had betrayed me 13 years ago, Sean. He noticed me staring in disbelief and approached with a nasty laugh. "Hey, ugly. Your kid, just like you, a defect." He said. His insult towards both Mia and me was infuriating. But then Kyle stepped between Sean and me. "What seems to be the problem with my daughter?" Kyle's inquiry made passers-by stop and look our way. However, Sean, for some reason, was too flustered to retort. Unable to stand the stares. "This is a private matter. It's none of your business, right?" he barked at Kyle. But Kyle, without changing his expression, "I'm involved because it concerns me. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother speaking to someone like you." Then, turning to Mia, "Mom and Dad have some business to attend to. Chelsea should be here to pick you up soon, so could you go to Chelsea's house first?" Kyle said with a smile. Hearing this, I couldn't help but exclaim, "Huh?" But Mia, mature for her age and not easily surprised, replied, "Okay, make sure you come early since it's a celebration." Then she left with the newly arrived Chelsea and her children. Kyle then turned to Sean, slightly leaning forward. "Shall we have a talk then? Let's change the location, shall we?" And he said with a pressuring laugh. Given Kyle's taller stature and his unassuming demeanor looming over him, Sean probably thought it better than being stared at curiously by onlookers, and surprisingly agreed to Kyle's suggestion without much resistance. The three of us got into a cab and arrived at the building where Kyle's office is located. Upon realizing it was a law firm, Sean's face turned pale again, but it was too late to run away, so he joined us in the elevator. Sean was visibly unsettled and nervous. Seeing Sean's discomfort, Kyle, with a mischievous smile, "It's truly frightening how coincidental it is to meet in person before sending the investigation report to the client," he said. Sean's face grew even paler at these words, but I had no idea what they were talking about. Seeing me like that, Kyle began to explain, to both Sean and me, in a way that was meant to make us listen. The client he mentioned earlier was the chairman of one of Kyle's client companies. The chairman had summoned Kyle to the company to request a background check on a certain man. Facing Kyle's smug smile, Sean's complexion worsened further. As Kyle continued, it turned out that the chairman's granddaughter had fallen deeply in love with a man she met in England and had asked for permission to marry him upon their return to the country, along with seeking a position from him at the company. The chairman's daughter, too, thought it was too abrupt for a sudden return marriage and employment as an executive candidate. After discussing with his daughter, the chairman decided to have Kyle's law firm investigate Sean. Hearing this, I had a bad feeling. Please don't tell me that the man is Sean, I asked Kyle, looking directly at Sean, but before Kyle could answer. What, you're saying it's bad if it's me? We've been over for ages. Who I marry is none of your business. Sean snapped back angrily. Well, I had no interest or concern for Sean. I harbored plenty of resentment. Sure, we split up, but weren't you the one who ran away after secretly filing for marriage license and making me a guarantor for your debts right before that? I shouted back, and for a moment, Sean looked surprised, but then quickly smiled. You say that, but you wanted to marry me too, didn't you? I just made your dream come true, and in return, you helped with the debt repayment, he said, then turned to look at Kyle. When I checked my passport for renewal, I was relieved to find out I was still single. I was worried you, an ugly defect, might have been waiting for my return, thinking no other man would marry you. Sean began with such a derogatory remark. I was infuriated by his demeaning words, but Kyle, once again, was the one to calm me down. I thought you were being quiet because you had reflected on your actions, but you're still the worst kind of man. He then explained why Sean was still single. The person who advised me when Sean disappeared and the debt collector started showing up was father-in-law John. I was a tutor at the time, and Chelsea was my student. Chelsea was smart, but was often excluded by her classmates, leading to her frequently missed school. Hired by the concerned parents-in-law, I not only helped Chelsea academically, but also became someone she could confide in, eventually becoming liked by the in-laws as if I were family. When consumer finance companies came to my apartment, Chelsea and mother-in-law Mary happened to visit to celebrate Chelsea's university acceptance. Shocked by my haggard appearance and enraged upon hearing what Sean had done, they immediately contacted John and grandfather-in-law, who brought me to this law firm. From there, Dad and Grandpa pulled together to solve the issue. First, they filed a lawsuit to annul the marriage since Sean had taken out a marriage license without my consent. And at the same time, they negotiated with the consumer finance companies to invalidate me being made a guarantor for the debt. It was tough, but Dad and Grandpa are well known in the industry, so in the end, both cases were successfully resolved. Kyle explained, though. I imagined suing a missing Sean and dealing with the transactions was a massive effort. Meanwhile, I, distressed, had turned down the job offer I had and worried about how I would pay the attorney fees until John suggested, if you can't find a job, you can work here. That led me to join this law firm, working diligently as a form of repayment. I offered to pay the attorney fees in small installments from my salary, but they accepted only a small amount. Thanks to their effort, the marriage was annulled, and I was removed as guarantor for the debt. So, strictly speaking, Sean was never your husband, just a blot on your life. Kyle remarked. Sean, still not fully grasping the severity, said, Good thing I have no marriage history with such a woman. And the debt is probably time-barred by now. At that moment, Kyle started to laugh. Stunned by this, there's no statute of limitations in effect. I think the debt collectors will be visiting you next week. Kyle told Sean. Sean might have thought the statute of limitations had passed after 13 years, but the consumer finance companies had transferred the debt to a debt collection agency, experts in collection. Although they don't use illegal means like in the past, they employ various methods to collect what's owed. Due to a court judgment against Sean by the debt collection company, the statute of limitations was extended by another 10 years from that point, making the debt fully valid now. With accrued late fees and court costs added, the total debt has multiplied significantly from the original amount. Upon hearing this, Sean's face momentarily darkened. Just a bit of debt like that, I can easily handle once I get a job at that company. But he defiantly responded. Such was Sean's shallow thinking, assuming that becoming an executive at the company would make repayment easy, despite his miscalculation. However, Kyle reminded him, Do you remember what I said earlier? Who had commissioned me to conduct your background investigation? This time, Sean's face truly turned pale. Actually, during my time as Chelsea's tutor, I hardly had any conversations with Kyle. But as Chelsea talked about me, Kyle became interested. After unexpectedly starting work at the office and becoming a lawyer, Kyle proposed dating me with a marriage in mind. I initially refused, feeling guilty towards John and my grandfather-in-law who had shown me kindness, after explaining my past. However, Kyle revealed he had known everything about Sean all along and still wanted to marry me, assuring me that the in-laws, far from objecting, were supportive. Kyle and I married with blessings from my parents, a happiness contrasted by my desire to seal away past memories. Unlike me, Kyle had long harbored a desire to retaliate against Sean. The request from the chairman, initially thought to be a coincidence of names, turned out to be Sean, leading to a report based on the investigation, ready to be sent next week. You must have thought your name, Sean Smith, was common enough to avoid detection. Planning to claim any trouble was just a coincidence of names. Don't think such lies would work on a lawyer, Kyle admonished. He revealed that the report had already been sent to the client at the request of the office staff. Adding to this, occasionally we've received inquiries from that consumer finance company about whether we had any news on Sean's whereabouts. I took the liberty of informing them. Kyle said with an evident amusement, Sean now desperate. Tell the chairman the report's contents were a mistake, he pleaded. But Kyle, with a cold smile, Why should I? A lawyer lie to a client? Especially not for someone who insulted a child in a wheelchair. He responded. Mia's injury happened when she was knocked over by a passerby while I briefly looked away. Since then, Chelsea worried about Mia's withdrawn demeanor, proposed a celebration upon learning Mia had won an art competition. Today's outing was for that celebration, now marred by Sean's intrusion. Kyle, deeply loving his daughter, must have been enraged not only by Sean's past actions, but also his recent insults towards Mia. Despite Kyle's cold dismissal, Sean continued to cry and plead loudly. Please, my future is at stake here. Are you going to ruin it? Desperately clinging to any hope of salvaging his situation. However, Kyle retorted, Ruin your life? What you did to Emily was precisely that. You're just facing the consequences of your own terrible actions now, aren't you? It's time to accept them. With that, he brushed off Sean's pleading arm. The exit is that way. He called security to escort Sean out of the office. As Sean's cries faded, Kyle and I exchanged smiles. Afterward, Sean rushed to the chairman's granddaughter to make excuses. However, after learning the truth, her anger did not subside, leading to their breakup. But the chairman and his daughter were not satisfied with just that. They reported Sean to the police for fraud, suspecting him of attempting to marry and join the company under false pretenses. While it didn't lead to a criminal case, a warning for stalking was issued. Sean's repeated stalking eventually led to his arrest. Though he received a suspended sentence, he was convicted. After being released on bail, he appeared to return to his normal life but couldn't find a new job due to his criminal record. Completely disowned by his parents after they learned everything from the chairman and police, Sean truly became alone. Trying to repay his debts through part-time jobs proved futile without identification and a fixed address. It seems he ended up working for a company known for illegal activities, working from dawn till dusk. But that's none of my concern now. Meanwhile, Kyle and I have moved to an apartment near the school Mia would attend after her injury healed. Mia enjoyed the bus ride and the view from her new room, appearing happy every day. When Kyle suggested, "Let's sell the house and move to an apartment," I worried about what the parents-in-law would think, but they supported the decision. "Being closer to my workplace means more family time. I'm glad we moved," said Kyle, with Mia also enjoying our new life. Seeing them so content, I too am considering trying something new.